The morning sun painted the Montana hills in soft gold as Anna stepped onto her wooden porch, coffee mug steaming in the crisp air. For 15 years, this had been her routine. Wake before dawn, check on the cattle, then watch the sunrise while her border collie Rex stretched and yawned beside her boots. Anna loved these quiet moments. The world felt peaceful here, 30 miles from the nearest town. No noise except the gentle lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. It was exactly what she had wanted when she first arrived in this remote corner of the state. All those years ago, she looked nothing like the tough rancher the local folks might expect. At 42, Anna stood barely 5'4", with graying brown hair she usually kept in a simple braid. Her clothes were practical, worn jeans, flannel shirts, sturdy boots that had seen better days. When she rode into town for supplies, people were always surprised by how soft-spoken she was. She never raised her voice, never caused trouble, never even complained when old Pete at the general store overcharged her for feed. The townspeople had their theories about her, of course. Small towns always do. Some figured she was running from a bad marriage. Others thought maybe she had family money and wanted to play at being a rancher. A few of the older women whispered that she must have lost a child somewhere and couldn't dare to be around people anymore. They were all wrong, but Anna never bothered to correct them. Let them think what they wanted. The truth was far more complicated and definitely more dangerous. Her ranch wasn't much to look at by Montana standards. Just 200 head of cattle, a small wooden house that creaked in the wind, and a barn that needed new paint. But it was hers, bought and paid for with money she had saved from her old life. The life before Anna, the life she never talked about. Rex barked once, then trotted down toward the pasture. Anna followed, her boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. The cattle were already moving toward the water trough, their breath making little clouds in the cold air. She counted them automatically, the way she had every morning for years. All present and accounted for, these weren't fancy cattle. No prize bulls or expensive breeding stock. Just good, honest beef cattle that would eventually make their way to market. Anna wasn't trying to get rich. She just wanted to live quietly, work with her hands, and forget about the person she used to be. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, an elderly couple named the Johnsons who raised sheep and minded their own business. Perfect neighbors, as far as Anna was concerned. They waved when they saw each other in town, maybe exchanged a few words about the weather, and that was enough. Anna had learned that the less people knew about you, the safer you were. As she walked back toward the house, Anna noticed Rex had stopped by the old oak tree near the gate. His ears were up, alert. She paused, listening. Nothing but the usual morning sounds. Still, she made a mental note. Rex had good instincts, better than most people realized. If something felt off to him, it was worth paying attention to. The house was small but comfortable. Anna had furnished it simply, a couch she had bought used, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, a bedroom with just the basics. The only unusual thing was the loose floorboard in the corner of her bedroom, but nobody else had reason to notice that. What was hidden beneath it was insurance. Insurance she hoped she would never need to collect on. After breakfast, Anna saddled up Ranger, her best horse, and rode out to check the fence line. This was her favorite part of the day. Out here, with just the horse and the open sky, she could almost forget about everything else. The fence was holding up well. Anna had learned to do the repairs herself over the years. Couldn't afford to hire help, and besides, she preferred working alone. Fewer questions that way. Fewer chances for someone to get too curious about her past. She was fixing a loose wire near the north pasture when she heard the sound. Horses, multiple horses, moving fast. Anna straightened up, shading her eyes with her hand. A group of riders was coming down from the hills, still too far away to make out clearly. But something about the way they moved made her stomach tighten. Rex growled low in his throat. He felt it too. Anna watched the riders for another minute, then quietly led Ranger back toward the house. No point in being careless. Living alone out here, a woman had to be smart about these things. Most folks were decent enough, but not everyone who rode through these parts had good intentions. By evening, the riders hadn't shown up at her place. Anna began to relax. Probably just drifters passing through, or maybe ranchers from further north moving cattle. Nothing to worry about. She cooked herself a simple dinner and settled in with a book. Rex curled up by the fireplace, but as she got ready for bed, Anna found herself checking the locks twice. And when she finally lay down, she didn't sleep as deeply as usual. Something in the air felt different. Like the calm before a storm. She had felt this way before years ago in her other life. The feeling that trouble was coming, whether you were ready for it or not. Back then she had been ready. More than ready. But that was a long time ago, and Anna had worked hard to become a different person. A peaceful person, still, old habits. Die hard. Before turning out the light, Anna glanced toward the corner where the loose floorboard waited. Whatever was under there had been sleeping for 15 years. She hoped it could stay that way. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the old house creak. Rex lifted his head, listening to something Anna couldn't hear. Then he settled back down, but his eyes stayed open, watching the door. Anna lay in the darkness, thinking about the riders she had seen. Could be nothing, probably was nothing. But in her experience, when something felt wrong, it usually was wrong. The trick was being ready when it showed up at your door. Tomorrow would be another quiet day, she told herself. Check the cattle. Mend any fence that needed mending, maybe ride into town for supplies. The same peaceful routine she had followed for 15 years. The routine that had kept her safe and anonymous and far away from the kind of trouble that used to follow her like a shadow. But deep down, Anna knew that tomorrow might not be quiet at all. Change was coming to her little ranch. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she used to feel danger approaching in the old days. The days when she went by a different name and carried a badge that opened doors and closed coffins in equal measure. For now, though, she was just Anna, a quiet rancher who kept to herself and bothered nobody. And maybe, if she was lucky, that's all she would ever have to be again. Anna woke up to Rex barking like his life depended on it. The sound cut through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife. She sat up in bed, instantly alert. Rex never barked unless something was seriously wrong. The clock on her knitstand showed 4:30. In the morning, way too early for any honest visitor. Anna slipped out of bed and moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. What she saw made her blood run cold. 5 men on horseback were spread out across her property, working together like they had done this before. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. And what they were doing was stealing her cattle. Anna watched as they used ropes and whistles to round up her herd. These weren't amateurs. They knew how to handle cattle, how to move them without spooking them too much. The moonlight was bright enough to see their faces clearly, and Anna memorized each one. A leader was easy to spot, a big man with a black beard who sat his horse like he owned the world. Her first instinct was to grab the rifle. She kept by the door and start shooting. But Anna had learned patience the hard way, years ago. 5 against 1 wasn't good odds, especially when they were spread out and she was stuck in the house. Better to wait and see what they planned to do. The men worked quickly and quietly. Within 20 minutes, they had her entire herd moving toward the hills. 200 head of cattle, worth about $40,000 at current prices. 15 years of careful work, gone in less than an hour, but they weren't leaving yet. The leader was riding toward her house, his horse's hooves crunching on the gravel driveway. Anna stayed at the window, watching him approach. He looked to be in his 40s, tall and thick-built, with the kind of swagger that came from never being told. No. He stopped right in front of her porch and tipped his hat like he was paying a social call. "Morning, ma'am," he called out in a voice loud enough to wake the dead. "Hope we didn't disturb your beauty sleep." Anna opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. She kept her hands visible and her voice calm. No point in making things worse by acting aggressive. "You're on private property," she said quietly. The man laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Well, now, that's a matter of opinion." "Why, I see. Everything belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it." He gestured toward where his men were driving her cattle up the mountain trail. "Much obliged for the livestock, by the way." Fine-looking animals you got there? Those cattle represent 15 years of work, Anna said, still keeping her voice level. They're all I have. Had? The man corrected her with a grin. Past tense, lady. And here's some free advice from Uncle Jake. Don't even think about calling the sheriff. We'll be long gone before that old fool could find his own boots, let alone track us through those mountains. So his name was Jake. Anna filed that information away along with his face. She had a very good memory for faces, especially ones belonging to people who had wronged her. Besides, Jake continued, clearly enjoying himself, what's one small-time rancher lady gonna do against the whole crazy horse gang? We've been taking what we want from folks like you for months now. Ain't nobody been able to stop us yet. His men were laughing and whooping as they drove the cattle higher into the hills. Anna could hear them clearly in the still morning air, celebrating like they had just won some kind of contest. Her cattle, her livelihood, her future, it was all just a game to them. You boys having fun out there? Jake called to his men without taking his eyes off Anna. Sure are, boss. One of them yelled back. This old gal had some prime beef here. Gonna fetch a good price down in Denver. Anna felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She recognized the feeling. It was the same sensation she used to get right before she made a decision that would change everything. The same feeling she hadn't experienced in 15 years. Well then, Jake said, still grinning at her. Guess our business here is concluded. You have yourself a real nice day now, ma'am. And don't you worry none. We'll take real good care of them cattle. He started to turn his horse away, then paused and looked back at her. Oh, and lady, if I was you, I wouldn't go spreading tales about what happened here today. The crazy horse gang don't take kindly to folks who cause us trouble. We remember faces, if you catch my meaning. Anna caught his meaning perfectly. She also caught the threat in his voice, the casual way he talked about violence, the assumption that she would just sit there and take it because she was a woman alone. I'll remember that, she said quietly. Smart girl, Jake said with approval. Most folks around here learned real quick that it's better to lose some cattle than to lose everything. He touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute. Y'all, take care now. Anna stood on her porch and watched them disappear into the mountains with her herd. The sound of lowing cattle and men's laughter echoed off the hills for a long time after they vanished from sight. Then everything went quiet. Again, except for the wind and Rex whimpering at her feet, she walked back into the house and closed the door. Then she sat down at her kitchen table and stared at her hands. They were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from rage. Pure, cold rage that she hadn't felt in 15 years. Those men had no idea who they had just robbed. They thought they had picked on some helpless woman who would cry and accept her loss and maybe move back to town where it was safer. They thought they could take everything she had worked for and ride away laughing about it. They were wrong. Anna got up and walked to her bedroom. She knelt down in the corner and pried up the loose floorboard. Inside was a wooden box she hadn't opened in 15 years. Her hands were steady now as she lifted the lid. Inside the box was a gun belt with a custom-made revolver, its leather holster worn smooth from years of use. Next to it was a badge made of tarnished silver, and underneath it was a stack of old wanted posters with her picture on them. Not the current her, the old her. The dangerous her. Anna picked up the revolver and checked the cylinder. Still loaded, she had always kept it ready, just in case. The weight of it in her hand brought back memories she had tried hard to forget. Memories of dust and gunfire and men who had underestimated her just like Jake and his gang had done. She looked at her reflection in the bedroom mirror. For 15 years, she had been Anna the quiet rancher. But before that, she had been someone else entirely. Someone who had never let an injustice go unpunished. Someone who had made a reputation. Tracking down men exactly like the crazy horse gang. Jake had said something that stuck with her. He said they remembered faces. Well, so did she. And unlike Jake, when Anna remembered a face, that person usually ended up regretting they had ever met her. The crazy horse gang thought they had just pulled off an easy score. What they had actually done was wake up something that had been sleeping. For 15 years, something dangerous, something that used to wear a badge and had never missed a shot that mattered. Anna closed the box and put it back under the floorboard, but not for long. She had some planning to do. Anna waited until the sun was fully up before she made her move. She needed to be smart about this. Rushing off in anger would only get her killed. And dead women don't get their cattle back. She walked around her property, studying the tracks. The gang had left behind 5 horses, all shod, heading northeast toward the high passes. The cattle tracks were easy to follow, too. 200 head of beef don't exactly tiptoe through the wilderness, but Anna wasn't looking at the tracks the way a regular rancher would. She was reading them like a book, the way she used to read. Sign when she wore a different name and carried a badge. The lead horse had a slight chip in its left front shoe. One of the other horses favored its right hind leg, probably an old injury. Little details that most people would miss, but details that could save your life when you were tracking dangerous men through hostile country. Back in the house, Anna opened the wooden box again. This time, she pulled everything out and laid it on her bed. The gun belt was made of the finest leather, custom-tooled, and perfectly fitted to her body. The revolver was a work of art, a Colt single-action with a 7-inch barrel and ivory grips, but it wasn't just pretty. This gun had been made for killing, and it had done its job many times over. Anna picked up the badge and rubbed the tarnish off with her thumb. U.S. Marshal, it read. Elena Rodriguez, Federal Marshal, Southwest District. That was her real name, her real life. The life she had walked away from after things went wrong in New Mexico. 15 years ago, she looked at the old wanted posters underneath the badge. Her own face stared back at her from a dozen different sheets. Not wanted for crimes, but wanted for justice. Dead Shot Rodriguez, the papers called her. The angel of death, the marshal who never misses. Those were different times. Times when the frontier was still wild and federal marshals had to be tougher than the outlaws they chased. Elena Rodriguez had been the toughest of them all. In 10 years of wearing the badge, she had brought in over 40 wanted men, 37 of them alive. 7 of them weren't so lucky. Elena, whoever she was now, strapped on the gun belt for the first time in 15 years. It felt like coming home. The weight of the weapon on her hip, the familiar pull of the leather across her shoulders. Her body remembered this feeling even if her mind had tried to forget it. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself. The quiet rancher was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone dangerous. Someone who had once made grown men cross the street rather than face her in a fair fight, but Elena knew that Jake and his gang wouldn't fight fair. Nobody ever did. When the stakes were high. That's why she had survived when so many other marshals hadn't. She had learned to fight dirty when she had to be smarter and faster and more ruthless than anyone expected a woman to be. The first thing she needed was supplies. Elena packed light, jerky, hardtack, coffee, and ammunition. Lots of ammunition. She filled her canteens with water and grabbed her bedroll. Then she saddled Ranger, her fastest and smartest horse. If she was going into the mountains after the crazy horse gang, she would need every advantage she could get. Rex whined and paced around the yard, sensing something was different. Elena knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "You stay here." "Boy," she told him quietly. "Guard the place. I'll be back when this is finished." The dog seemed to understand. He had always been smarter than most people gave him credit for. Elena mounted up and took one last look at her little ranch. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And nobody was going to take it away from her without paying the price. The trail was easy to follow at first. Jake's gang hadn't bothered to hide their tracks. Why would they? As far as they knew, they had just robbed a helpless woman who wouldn't dare come after them. They had no idea that the quiet rancher was actually one of the most feared marshals in the history of the American West. Elena rode, hard but steady, pushing Ranger just enough to make good time without wearing him out. The mountains were unforgiving, and a tired horse could mean death up in those peaks. She had learned that lesson the hard way years ago. Chasing cattle thieves through Colorado. As she rode, muscle memory kicked in. Her eyes automatically scanned the terrain for ambush spots. Her ears picked up sounds that most people would miss: the call of a bird that didn't belong in these mountains, the echo of shod hooves on stone somewhere ahead. Skills she had thought were rusty came flooding back like she had never stopped. Using them. By afternoon, Elena had climbed high enough to see the cattle moving through a distant valley. Jake's men were taking their time, probably figuring they had all day to reach whatever hideout they were heading for. They had no idea they were being hunted. Elena studied the terrain ahead through her field glasses. She knew these mountains better than most people knew their own backyards. 15 years of riding these trails, checking fence lines, and chasing stray cattle had given her an advantage that Jake's gang couldn't match. There were 3 ways through the high country to reach the major cattle markets. The gang would have to choose one of them by nightfall. Elena knew shortcuts that could get her ahead of them, places where one person with a good rifle could control an entire canyon, places where the hunted could become the hunter. As the sun started to set, Elena made her choice. Devil's Canyon was the most likely route. It offered water and shelter, and it was the fastest way to the railhead where stolen cattle could be loaded and shipped east. If she was right, Jake's gang would camp there tonight. If she was wrong, she would lose their trail and probably never see her cattle again. Elena urged Ranger up a steep game trail that would bring her to the rim of Devil's Canyon well before the gang arrived. The horse picked his way carefully over loose rocks and around fallen trees. One wrong step would mean 100-foot fall onto jagged rocks below, but Elena wasn't worried. She had ridden worse trails than this in pursuit of men who deserved what was coming to them. Men like Jake, who thought they could take whatever they wanted from people who couldn't fight back. As darkness fell, Elena reached the canyon rim and looked down. Far below, she could see the orange glow of a campfire. Jake's gang had made camp right where she expected them to. Her cattle were grazing in a natural corral formed by rock walls. Everything was exactly as she had predicted. Elena smiled for the first time since the raid. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile that had once made hardened criminals decide they would rather face a hangman's rope than stand against Deadshot Rodriguez in a fair fight. Jake thought he had stolen cattle from a helpless rancher woman. What he had actually done was steal from a federal marshal who had never failed to bring in her man. And Elena Rodriguez always collected what was owed to her with interest. The quiet rancher was gone forever. In her place sat a woman who had once been the most feared lawman in the Southwest, a woman who was about to remind the world why they used to call her Deadshot. Elena spent the night on the canyon rim, watching the gang below. She didn't sleep much, but that was nothing new. During her martial days, she had learned to function on catnaps and coffee. Tonight, she used the time to study her enemies. Jake was clearly the leader. The other men deferred to him, brought him food first, and waited for his orders. He was also the most dangerous. Elena could tell by the way he moved, the way he kept his hand near his gun even while relaxing by the fire. This wasn't his first rodeo. The second man was younger, maybe mid-20s, with nervous energy that showed in everything he did. He kept jumping at shadows and looking over his shoulder. Either this was his first big job, or he had a guilty conscience about something. Nervous men made mistakes, and Elena knew how to use that. The third gang member was built like a mountain, tall, broad, and thick through the chest. He did most of the heavy work around camp, but Elena noticed he never strayed far from his rifle. Muscle with brains was always more dangerous than muscle alone. The fourth man was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the careful movements of someone who had been shot before. He was the one who tended to the cattle, and he did it with the skill of a real cowboy. Elena figured he was probably the most experienced rustler in the group. The fifth man was harder to read. He stayed in the shadows mostly, speaking only when spoken to. But Elena caught glimpses of his face in the firelight, and she didn't like what she saw. Cold eyes, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who enjoyed hurting people. By dawn, Elena had her plan. It wasn't complicated. The best plans never were. She would wait until the gang was getting ready to move out, when they were distracted and spread out. Then she would make her presence known and give them one chance to surrender. When they refused, and they would refuse, she would do what she had to do. Elena checked her weapons one more time. The Colt was loaded and ready. She had 2 spare cylinders prepared, plus a rifle with a full magazine. Enough firepower to handle 5 men if she was smart about it. And Elena had always been smart about killing when she had to dot. As the sun came up, the gang below started stirring. Jake was first up, kicking at the dying embers of their fire. The others rolled out of their blankets and began the routine of breaking camp. Elena watched them through her field glasses, timing their movements. Jake sent 2 men to bring in the cattle while the others packed up the camp gear. This was perfect. It split the gang into smaller groups, making Elena's job easier. She waited until the cattle were moving and the men were spread out across the canyon floor. Then she stood up. Elena stepped to the edge of the rim where she could be seen clearly against the morning sky. She held her rifle casually but ready, and her voice carried easily in the thin mountain air. "Jake Morrison," she called down. Her voice was steady and calm, with no trace of fear. "You stole from the wrong woman." The effect was immediate. All 5 men stopped what they were doing and looked up. Elena could see the surprise on their faces as they spotted her silhouette on the canyon rim. Jake's hand dropped to his gun, but he didn't draw, not yet. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake called back, his voice echoing off the rock walls. "Little lady rancher decided to follow us after all. You got guts, I'll give you that. But you're making a real big mistake coming here alone." "I'm not alone," Elena replied. It was true, in a way. She had the spirits of every lawman who had ever died trying to bring justice to men like Jake. "And you're the one making the mistake," Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Lady, I don't know what you think you're gonna accomplish up there, but you're outnumbered 5 to 1. Why don't you just ride on home and chalk this up to a learning experience?" "Can't do that, Jake. Those are my cattle, and I want them back." "Your cattle?" Jake's voice was getting harder now, less amused. "These here cattle belong to whoever's strong enough to keep them. And right now, that's us, not you." Elena shifted her grip on the rifle. The movement was small, but every man in the canyon saw it and understood what it meant. "I've faced worse odds than this, Jake, against men twice as dangerous as you." That got their attention. Elena could see the gang members looking at each other, probably wondering who this woman was and why she sounded so confident. Jake was still trying to maintain control of the situation, but Elena could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this ain't no dime novel. This is real life, and real life don't have happy endings for folks who bite off more than they can chew. You're right about one thing, Jake. This isn't a dime novel. In the books, I would give you a long speech about justice and the law. But this is real life, and in real life, cattle thieves get exactly what they deserve." Elena raised her rifle and fired once. The shot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Jake's hat flew off his head, and he dove for cover behind a boulder. The other men scattered, reaching for their weapons. "Next shot won't miss," Elena called down. "Any of you boys smart enough to surrender, now would be a good time to speak up." Instead of surrendering, the gang opened fire. Bullets whined off the rocks around Elena's position, forcing her to drop flat and crawl backward from the rim. She had expected this. Men like Jake never gave up without a fight. Elena knew the canyon like the back of her hand from her years of ranching in the area. There was a game trail that led down the east wall, hidden from the main floor. It would put her behind the gang's position. Time to show them what a real fighter could do. The climb down was treacherous, but Elena had done worse. She moved quickly, but carefully, her boots finding purchase on loose shale and narrow ledges. Behind her, she could hear Jake shouting orders to his men, trying to organize a defense against an enemy. They couldn't see. Elena reached the canyon floor and began working her way through the rocks toward the gang's position. She could hear them calling to each other, trying to figure out where she had gone. Good. Confusion was her friend right now. She spotted the nervous young one first. He was crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle pointing up toward where Elena had been. He never saw her coming. Elena stepped out from behind a boulder and spoke quietly. "Drop the rifle, son." The young man spun around, eyes wide with panic. Instead of dropping his weapon, he tried to bring it to bear on Elena. It was the last mistake he ever made. Elena's Colt spoke once, and the young rustler crumpled to the ground. "Billy's hit," someone yelled. "She got Billy." Elena was already moving, using the sound of their voices to locate the rest of the gang. The big man was next. She found him trying to flank her position. He was tough and experienced, but he made too much noise moving through the rocks. Elena heard him coming from 50 yards away. This one tried to surrender when he saw her Colt pointed at his chest. "Don't shoot, lady. I give up." "Should have thought of that before you stole my cattle," Elena replied. Her second shot echoed through the canyon. 3 down, 2 to go. But these last 2 would be the hardest. Jake was smart and dangerous, and the quiet one with the cold eyes was still an unknown quantity. Elena needed to be very careful now. She could hear them moving through the rocks, trying to coordinate an attack. They knew she was deadly now, and they would be more cautious. But Elena had something they didn't have. She was fighting for her home, her life, everything she had worked for. They were just fighting for stolen cattle, and in Elena's experience, that made all the difference in the world. The canyon fell silent except for the sound of Elena's breathing and the nervous shuffling of cattle. Somewhere in the rocks, Jake and his last man were waiting, planning their next move. Elena crouched behind a boulder and listened carefully. After years of tracking dangerous men, she had learned to hear things other people missed. There, a small sound of boot leather on stone, maybe 30 yards to her left. Someone was trying to circle around behind her. Elena smiled grimly. It was an old trick, one she had seen countless times before. Jake was sending his last man around while he stayed put, probably hoping to catch her in a crossfire. Elena had a better idea. She picked up a small rock and threw it hard to her right. It clattered against the canyon wall, echoing in the morning air. Immediately she heard movement from both directions, Jake's men taking the bait. Thinking she had moved toward the sound, while they repositioned themselves, Elena went the opposite direction. She worked her way through the rocks like a ghost, using every bit of cover the canyon offered. This was what had made her legendary as a marshal, the ability to become invisible when she needed to strike from where her enemies least expected. She found Jake crouched behind a pile of boulders, his rifle trained on the spot where the rock had landed. He was so focused on watching for movement that he never sensed Elena coming up behind him. The first thing he knew about her presence was the cold touch of her Colt's barrel against the back of his neck. "Game's over, Jake?" Elena said quietly. Jake went rigid, but he was smart enough not to move. "You're pretty good at this, lady. Better than I gave you credit for." "Drop the rifle," slowly. Jake let his weapon fall to the ground. "Mind if I ask who I'm surrendering to? I like to know who beats me." "Elena Rodriguez. Federal Marshal, you might have heard of me." Elena heard Jake's sharp intake of breath. Even 15 years later? Name still carried weight in certain circles. "Dead shot Rodriguez," he whispered. "I thought you was dead. Just retired." But apparently not retired enough. "What about Wilson?" Jake asked, referring to his last man. "You gonna hunt him down?" "Too?" "That depends on how smart he is," Elena replied. "Wilson," she called out, her voice carrying across the canyon. "Your boss is done fighting. You can join him, or you can ride out of here and never come back. Your choice." There was a long silence. Then Elena heard the sound of hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Wilson had made the smart choice. He was riding hard for the exit, leaving Jake to face the consequences alone. "Looks like your friend decided you weren't worth dying for," Elena observed. Jake laughed bitterly. "Can't say I blame him." Wilson always was the practical type. Elena stepped back, keeping her gun trained on Jake while she picked up his rifle. "Stand up, hands where I can see them." Jake got to his feet slowly, his hands raised. For the first time since this whole thing started, he looked like what he really was, a middle-aged criminal who had finally run out of luck. "So what happens now, Marshal? You gonna shoot me in cold blood?" "That would be justice," Elena said. "But it wouldn't be legal. Not anymore." "Not anymore?" Elena reached into her shirt and pulled out the old badge, the one she hadn't worn in 15 years. "I stopped being a marshal a long time ago, Jake, which means I can't arrest you." Can't take you in for trial, and can't legally shoot you unless you give me cause. Jake's eyes narrowed. Then what's stopping me from just walking away? Nothing. Legal, Elena admitted. But here's the thing about justice, Jake. Sometimes it doesn't need a badge to get done. Before Jake could react, Elena's fist connected with his jaw. The big man went down hard, his head bouncing off a rock. He didn't get back up. Elena checked his pulse to make sure he was still breathing, then used his own rope to tie his hands behind his back. When Jake woke up, he would have some serious thinking to do about his life choices. The cattle were easy enough to round up. Elena had been working with livestock for 15 years, and these animals knew the sound of her voice, the way she moved. Within an hour, she had them heading back down the mountain toward her ranch. It was late afternoon when Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived at Devil's Canyon with a small posse. They had heard the gunfire echoing across the mountains and come to investigate. What they found was Elena sitting by a small campfire, calmly drinking coffee while her cattle grazed nearby. "Anna," the sheriff called out, confused. "What in blazes are you doing out here, and whose bodies are those?" Elena looked up from her coffee cup. "Hello, Tom. Those would be members of the Crazy Horse Gang, the ones who thought it would be funny to steal my cattle." Sheriff Bradley dismounted and walked over to where the bodies lay covered with blankets. He pulled back one of the covers and whistled low. "Billy Thompson? We've been after this boy for months." He checked the others. "And Frank Morrison and Big Pete Williams. These are some dangerous men, Anna. How did you—" He stopped talking when Elena stood up and pinned something to her shirt. The old marshal's badge caught the afternoon sunlight. "Elena Rodriguez," Sheriff Bradley whispered, his eyes wide. "Dear God in heaven, Deadshot Rodriguez." "Just Rodriguez now, Tom. The Deadshot part was never my favorite nickname anyway." "But you disappeared 15 years ago. Everyone figured you were ... Well, everyone figured you were dead." Elena poured herself another cup of coffee from the pot by the fire. "I got tired of killing people, Tom. Tired of chasing bad men through bad country. Tired of being someone that mothers used to scare their children with, so I hung up my guns and became Anna the rancher. It was a good life." "Was?" Elena gestured toward the covered bodies. "These men decided to take everything I'd worked for. Figured I was just some helpless woman who wouldn't fight back." She took a sip of her coffee. "They figured wrong." Sheriff Bradley looked around the canyon, taking in the tactical situation. 5 men against 1 woman. Those are terrible odds. "I've faced worse. What about Jake Morrison?" "I don't see his body here." Elena nodded toward a clump of trees where Jake sat tied to a trunk, still unconscious. "He's over there." "Figured I'd let you decide what to do with him. I'm not a marshal anymore, so technically I can't arrest him." Sheriff Bradley walked over to check on Jake, then came back shaking his head. "You know, Elena, there are folks who would pay good money to have been here to see this. Deadshot Rodriguez's last gunfight." "Not my last gunfight, Tom. Just the most recent one. And hopefully the last one I'll ever need." The sheriff helped Elena get her cattle ready for the trip back to the ranch. As they worked, he kept glancing at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Anna," he said finally, "or Elena. Or whoever you are now, what are you gonna do? Word's gonna get out about this. People are gonna know who you really are." Elena looked out across the mountains, toward the little ranch that had been her home for 15 years. "I'm going to go back to raising cattle, Tom, same as I always have. The only difference is that now folks will know better than to steal. From me. And if someone else tries, someone who thinks they can take on the famous Deadshot Rodriguez?" Elena adjusted the gun belt around her waist. After 15 years in storage, it felt like it belonged there again. "Then I guess they'll learn the same lesson Jake's gang just learned. Some people look peaceful because they choose to be, not because they have to be." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Elena's cattle moved easily, happy to be heading home. Sheriff Bradley rode alongside, still shaking his head in amazement. Behind them, tied to his horse, Jake Morrison swayed in his saddle, finally awake but smart enough to keep his mouth shut when they reached Elena's ranch. Rex came running out to greet them, barking with joy. The dog had been worried sick about his owner, and now he could smell that she was safe. Elena knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "It's all right, boy," she told him. "We're home now, and nobody's gonna bother us again any time soon." As Sheriff Bradley loaded Jake into his wagon for the trip back to town, the outlaw looked back at Elena one more time. "This ain't over, Rodriguez," he called out. "Word's gonna spread about what happened here. There'll be others who want to test themselves against the famous dead shot." Elena looked at him calmly. "Let them come, Jake. I'll be here." After the sheriff left, Elena stood on her porch and watched the sun set over her ranch. Her cattle were safe in the pasture, Rex was sleeping at her feet, and the mountains were quiet once again, but things were different now. The secret she had kept for 15 years was out. People would come, some seeking revenge, others looking for glory, all of them thinking they could be the one to outdraw the legendary Elena Rodriguez. Elena touched the badge pinned to her shirt. Maybe it was time to put it back on officially. These mountains needed law and order, and she had proven today that retirement hadn't dulled her skills any. Tomorrow she would think about the future. Tonight she was just grateful to be home, with her cattle safe and her conscience clear. Sometimes justice came at the end of a gun, and sometimes that was exactly what the world needed. The quiet rancher was gone forever. In her place stood Elena Rodriguez, and she was ready for whatever came next.